This week I got to talk with Elizabeth Rose Quinn about her new thriller, Follow Me, which is a scathing takedown of mommy influencer culture, specifically in the sense that mothers are manipulated so much in that realm. So here is what the synopsis is. After her twin sister Chiara goes missing at a mom-fluencer weekend, Adrienne Shaw will find her no matter what it takes. They may have been on the outs, but no one comes for her sister and gets away with it. It's been a year, the authorities have no answers, and her brother-in-law is useless in the matter. It's time for Adrienne to take the case into her own hands. Following in Chiara's last footsteps, Adrienne goes undercover, infiltrating the same influencer retreat as the last thing she wants to be, an Instamommy. The remote ranch in Northern California is certainly welcoming in a cult-adjacent kind of way. A charismatic leader, communal crafts, fixed smiles, and a lot of dead eyes. Going on gut instinct and chasing a wild theory that Chiara came here and never left, Adrienne is determined to uncover the truth before the too perfect to believe women figure out who Adrienne really is, a threat to be eliminated. This book ended up kind of reminding me of the same passion that Lori Brand had for writing Bodies to Die For. She felt really passionate about the social issue of the way that we talk about our bodies, and it inspired her to write something thrilling and horrific from that place of rage. And what I loved about my conversation with Elizabeth is she was sharing as well, becoming a new mother during the pandemic, especially, and all of the different mixed messages she was getting, while also the somewhat manipulation that happens really easily to moms in influencer spaces. So if that sounds interesting, you need to go pick this one up. But for now, let's hear from Elizabeth. I am super excited to talk about Follow Me, but I did want to get to know you a little bit before we dive into that book. So what was your moment where you were like, I want to write a book, or your moment that was like, I think I want to be a writer?
I mean, in terms of wanting to be a writer, I always wanted to be a writer. Like I was making books out of construction paper before I knew how to write words, before I could read.
Right.
It's like, Mom, it's a picture book. She was like, that makes sense since you don't know the alphabet yet. And my dad was a professor at Berkeley, and so he wrote a lot of books as part of his work. So kind of writing was always out there in the atmosphere as like, someone could do this and it could be me.
Yeah.
And then spent a long time trying to figure out, how am I going to do this?
Yeah, right. I feel like that's, the whole what's my version of doing it is the hard part.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So I tried many different versions of writing, and this was really the one that I always wanted, but felt like too insane, like too out there. It's like saying I want to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
And so I kind of still can't believe it's like worked out. It's like I tried so many more viable versions of this career, and yet here I am.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. What does your writing process look like for fiction? So do you plot stuff out? Do you pants it? How do you do it?
I plot. So I spent, 15 years in LA working in writers' rooms and doing that. And so you really learn to outline. Mostly because you're generally on a deadline, and I worked in a lot of multicam. So it's like, rehearsal went poorly, and the crew's going to be here at 7 a.m. and they need a script, and we have 40 pages to rewrite today. So trying to avoid as many story problems as possible is how and why I outline. Also, because I have two small kids, it's like, particularly with this first book, I wrote so much of it like in my parked car.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be things like, I have 10 minutes, and with an outline, I know what I can do in those 10 minutes. I know where I'm going. I'm not trying to be like, where is inspiration? It's like, no, it's plot point B. I can do that in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So I am definitely an outliner, big time outliner.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of how it's like, if you really do have everything planned out. You can even make like 15 minutes really productive if you just know like one thing you can do.
Yes, my lovely sister is also a professor, and when she was getting her PhD, went to a conference about how to write your dissertation. And the woman said, always park your work on a downslope. That was how she phrased it. So that it's easy to get started the next day. Like
Yeah.
if you have a really easy passage coming up, or for me, like an easy scene, it's like, I'll leave that so that the next day, if I have like a big chunk of writing, just to like get into it really easily. And the outline means I'm permanently in that downslope. Like I never have to
Yeah.
figure out what to do. It's there waiting for me.
Yeah. I love that. But speaking of kids, and I'm assuming chauffeuring them all over the place sometimes, what was that part of the inspiration for the book? It gets into mom-fluencer culture. What drew you to writing about that in a thriller format?
This was one of those books where I felt like I was picking up tiny pieces of it for a decade and just kind of like, oh, that's interesting, and like putting it in my back pocket and trying to like I would read an article about like moms who are microdosing, and I was like, that's really
Oh yeah.
cool. And then kind of turning it over, and one of the things that you learn as a TV writer is when something is a story versus smells like a story. So there's a lot of things where it's like, it smells like a story, but it's not a whole story. Um, I knew somebody who was like, oh yeah, this actress friend of mine just put out a book about like embracing the joy and the mess of motherhood, and they were like, I'm so pissed because she's got like 2 nannies and a full-time
Oh,
housekeeper that she does not mention in this book.
that
Yeah.
sucks.
And this was like in
Mhm.
2013 that I had this conversation, and I was like, huh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. And then as influencer culture built,
Mhm.
and that Wild West in the beginning where they didn't have to say what was an ad,
Mhm. Yeah.
and there
Yeah,
was
we
a big
didn't have like SpawnCon and all of that.
mhm. Um, and then I had my first child, and she turned 1, and the next week quarantine started. So suddenly it was
Oh,
like my entire universe was like shrunk down to my
yeah.
apartment and a phone.
Whew.
And I just started to look at all these things, and I was like, okay, I like work in production and TV. Like they have lighting. This
Mhm.
took a really long time to edit. Who
Yeah.
set up this camera? Like
Mhm.
I was asking kind of bizarre production questions that I felt like maybe other people who were watching weren't asking, and I was just like,
Probably, yeah.
"This is all fake."
Mhm.
But at the end of the video, they're like, "Buy this thing, and you can be just like
Yes.
me." And I felt very also very suspicious of like, well, they're selling me this product, but they're also clearly selling my attention to the
Mhm.
company. And
Yes.
they're not really being honest about that, and so this kind of
Mhm.
confluence of, like, me being a parent, having my world, like, reduced to quarantine universe, and then also just being like, I'm I'm being sold as a product as much as, like, the pans that they're selling me, and that
Right.
feels disingenuous, and this whole kind of like, "It's easy, I'm accessible, if we met, we would be friends, and we can't, that's so
Mhm.
sad, but if you buy these pans, we're basically cooking together," and I was just like, "Yes."
Right?
Yeah, so those
Yeah.
are two of the places that all this stuff came from. It was like but each of those were like their own thing, and then,
Right.
I love, Stepford Wives and Get Out and
Mm.
Promising Young Woman, and I had worked in screenwriting for a long time, and so I loved the vehicle of horror to do social commentary,
Mhm. Yeah.
and so when I was like, "What is this?" I was like, "Oh, I could make it like a horror novel," and I read mysteries and thrillers, and I love
Mhm.
a cozy mystery, a British cozy mystery. Give me an old lady solving crime in a village, I'm happy. I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this my hours of BBC viewing could actually come in handy."
Right?
And again, it was like all these little pieces just like suddenly
Yeah.
together.
That's cool. That's a I can't remember, it might have been I listened to Big Magic a while ago, and
Mm.
she kinda talked about how, like, if you're in the mindset of thinking about story, then, like, you are, like, attuned to things that will, like, kinda help build the story, so it sounds like it was kind of like that, which is kinda cool.
Yes.
Probably because it sparks your interest in your thoughts already so naturally. So like, why not write about it, especially when you can do it like satirically.
And it's really, I was really mad. I was
Yeah.
like, I can't be this mad at my baby or my husband, but I can be this mad at mythical people that I will
Yes.
possibly gruesomely murder. That will,
Uh-huh.
it was like an exorcism. I was like, I've got to get this out.
Yeah. Totally though. The other thing it's reminding me of, I can't remember which podcast I was listening to, but like how funny it is that like 20-year-old models sell us like whatever skincare routines for your
Yes.
face. And it's like that no, you're 21. That's why your face looks that way. Like my
Yeah.
face isn't gonna look that way
Yeah.
just if I buy this product. So there's so much about marketing that's like, let me hit you at your insecurity and hope that like hurts enough that you don't think
Mhm.
too hard about it.
Yeah. And I think the 1-2 punch for me of there's a lovely podcast called You Are Good, and the one of the hosts, Sarah Marshall, asked, she said, I think horror movies are the way we deal with our like wider societal fears.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to their episode like on Poltergeist and on Rosemary's Baby and
Mm-hmm.
on, even E.T. and like all these different things and like what societal fears those were dealing with. And I was like, okay, well, what's the
Mm-hmm.
societal fear right now? And the New York Times had just come out with its Scream line, which I think they had done as like a joke, like call this line and scream. And thousands and thousands and thousands of parents called to scream.
Whoa.
And they had to kind of do a serious article like, oh, things are really bad. Like women are leaving the workplace in droves, like schools are
Mm-hmm.
closed, quarantine's crazy, like there's no social security.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I think the societal fear right now is parenthood as we have constructed it in the United States is a nightmare and impossible and has been irrevocably broken, and no one thinks it's going to like come back
Right.
when quarantine's over. And I was like, ooh, I could write a
Mm-hmm.
whole movie about that.
Yeah. And that you were in that really unique position too of like, you said it was your first kid
Mhm,
was like with the pandemic. So it's
mhm.
like something that also should have like been a normal experience or you had all kinds of expectations for it, I'm sure. Now
Yeah.
it's like your first time being a parent and you're like doing it in an environment where you're like, I don't even know what to do.
And no one does. Like there's
Yeah.
no, I
Yeah.
can't call my mom. She's never parented like this, right?
Right.
And I don't own a home and I'm living in an apartment and we don't have any outdoor space and people are like, just go outside. And I'm like, the
Where?
park by us has 18-foot high fences around it.
Oh,
Like we can't go to the park. Like that's,
yeah.
I was there like trying to like basically like build jungle gyms inside my house and like doing like pom pom
Right.
marble runs on the wall with like paper towel tubes and like tying balloons to the ceiling so I could like try to do motor skills. Like our pediatrician said, how does she do on stairs? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, why not? And I was like, because we don't have any. She's like, oh yeah. I was like, where are we? We can't go find stairs. Like
Yeah.
we're not supposed to go outside.
My gosh.
So
Yeah.
it really felt like a horror movie. So I just kind of was like, what if I make it a horror
Right.
movie?
Yeah,
Make
totally.
it a horror story for me to.
It does sound like it was like the like cathartic way to deal with just all of it was to like write something.
Yes, very much so. Very
Mhm.
much so.
You're like, you got it.
Yeah.
um so there's also the sisters or twin sisters at the
Mhm.
um heart of the story. That's a lot of what's going on, and there's clearly been tension in the past. They both have their own things.
Mhm.
How did you craft their sister dynamic?
Something that's always interested me and like as a theme that's come up in my writing for many years is I always love when people experience the same thing
Mm,
but have very different reactions to it.
mhm,
And that the tension between you're the only person who understands and yet the way that you're handling this is so foreign to me. And
mhm,
that kind of push pull. And so I thought to have them share a really kind of difficult childhood that for them set the stage for what is parenting, what does it look like, what do I want from it, and to have them both
mhm,
have really opposite reactions. Adrienne's reaction is I'm never doing that. I don't like
mhm.
I'm not interested in men. I don't want
Yeah.
kids. It's all a sham. It was horrible. I'm not doing it. And
Mhm.
Chiara's reaction makes as much sense to me, which is I really want to do it and I want it to kind of look like what I saw in the movies. I don't care if it's
Mhm.
lame. I
Yeah.
want to live in a little tract house. I want to try to like, go to the park and like have little
Mhm.
birthday parties. Like I didn't get that and it's really important to me.
Yeah.
And the idea that the connection also becomes what's so painful, I felt like was really
Mhm.
interesting. And then just from a
Yeah.
story structure perspective, I wanted an outsider to go to the retreat because
Mm.
I wanted to have that lens of not somebody who had like already bought in, but somebody who was just like,
Right.
"What the hell is this? What's going
Yeah.
on?"
Yes.
Um, and it's easier to do that with an outsider point of view who doesn't have
Yeah.
any.
It definitely is. It is interesting because it's like, what you're saying, trauma can, like, just do totally different things to people.
Mhm.
Because yeah, sometimes or even in just different areas of your life, sometimes you are like, "Oh, I wanna do it so I can do it different." And sometimes you're like, "I don't want any part of that." So it is nice having both
Mhm.
of them, like, having those different experiences.
Mhm.
Um, but then with her being an outsider, it's you kinda need an outsider through Adrienne too, because it's getting into a very cult-like organization.
Yeah.
So the people there have already bought all the way in. They're sipping the Kool-Aid. So we need her to be on the outside to be able to like even like see what's going on from a mostly unbiased perspective. So did you do research into cults? Like how did you create that scenario?
I mean, I think there's a way, that you talked about in terms of people selling you solutions to things that like are problems they don't actually have. It's like your stomach is
Mhm.
flat because you're 22 and hot. Like that's what you're
Yes.
but preying on people's insecurities.
Mhm.
And then of course, I think like there's a lot of like really great like cult documentaries and like the Nexium
Mhm.
one had come out. And what does it look like? Like what's kind of the common denominator of those things? So often it's like people are desperate and they're
Mhm.
lonely and they're
Mhm.
looking for community and support and they're looking for a way to live their lives that feels meaningful,
Mhm.
where they feel seen.
Mhm.
And that's so true when you become a parent because it can be really hard when you have a small child. It is very isolating to kind
Mhm.
of be all alone on your one little nap schedule.
Yeah.
And we don't live in a society that really supports parents and young children being out in the public
Mhm.
and it just felt like what a perfect breeding ground for somebody to take advantage of them. And they do.
Yeah.
I mean, they do all the time on Instagram. And it was like maybe the cult isn't like a hut in the middle of nowhere where you're like
Mhm.
signing over your bank account, but you are suddenly like buying a bunch of stuff because you're desperately trying to like feel connection. So it didn't
Mhm.
feel like that far of a leap for me from
Right. Right.
where does isolation take you? 'Cause sometimes it makes you make really bad choices because you're desperate.
Yeah, totally. And then with the women, at this, like, summit, they obviously, we kinda talked about they're presenting one way, and then there's a lot of other stuff going on behind the
Mhm.
scenes, which is kind of a theme all throughout, but definitely with them
Yeah.
as well.
Yes.
So how a couple questions. How much fun did you have kinda, like, making them contradict each themselves and just, like, writing that whole dynamic?
I mean, it was cathartic. It was an
Yeah.
exorcism. It was everything. There was, like, a popular sleep training person, who was, like, on Instagram and was doing, like, had a website, and my daughter wasn't sleeping, and, of course, I'm, like, trapped in an apartment with her during the pandemic, and so I'm, like, reading this thing like it's a Bible, and it's this whole, like, "Oh my gosh, like, you just do these 8 steps and they'll sleep perfectly," and you're clicking
Right.
through, and it's like, "Okay, if you've done this, you've really set the stage, like, the last 2 steps are the ones that you've gotta do perfectly," and I'm like, "Okay." And then I click and it's like, and now you have to sign up for a subscription to get those last 2 steps.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I'm going to burn everything to the ground. And I was
Yes.
like 8 paragraphs into an angry email to that website. And then I was like,
Yeah.
I don't think this is the most productive way to deal with this. But
Right.
also then I think at some point I realized like, this person does not have children.
No.
And this person like does not take into account like neurodiverse kids or kids who have disabilities. You know, we have wonderful friends that we love and their son has disabilities. And so like their experience of like what sleep training was, they're like, we can't do that. Like we actually have to go see when he's crying because something terrible could be happening because it has. And I'm just like,
Right.
this idea of like this disconnect of like everything's perfect. And you're just like, there's no way that real life is perfect. And you presenting it as such is not possible.
Right.
And, you know, everyone who's got like, I just use olive oil and I drink a lot of water. It's like, you got a facelift. Just say you got a facelift. Just say it.
I know.
You know?
Like it is. It's nice when people will just say what they, not that you like owe it to us to tell us every procedure you get done, but like
No.
sometimes it's I do prefer like reality TV is what comes to mind when they can just be honest about what they did between seasons because like your whole face looks different.
It's like, don't sell me like a farmstead trad wife lifestyle. And then it turns out you have immeasurable wealth. That is
Yeah.
not the same as my husband and I like making, you know, a really globally very high salary of like $60,000 a year and buying a farm.
Yeah.
That is not, and you not saying that is so disingenuous.
Yes.
You know,
I agree.
you don't have to tell me you got a facelift, but don't try to sell me olive oil that's going to make my wrinkles go away.
Exactly.
Don't get to
Yep.
have it both ways. And so I enjoyed that maybe a little too much.
Yeah, totally.
Just renovate your house, but don't live in your house. So you just get a second house. And it's like,
What? Yeah, it's just such a disconnect. I wanted to interrupt this episode really quickly. I have a goal of monetizing Bookwild, but I would love to do it without having to have ads in the podcast. And one way that I can do that is through my Patreon community. For those who don't know, Patreon is a community platform that allows creators to share what they're creating behind a paywall. And so that means exclusive content or early releases. The Bookwild Patreon has 2 tiers. The first tier is the bookish tier, and at that tier you get all of the episodes out a day early, and you get access to our private community chat where we can talk about anything book related or TV shows or movies. The second tier is the Bookwild tier, and it includes everything from the first tier but also Bookwild's backlist book club. So this year I've been wanting to also still read more backlist, even though I read plenty of arcs, and Bookwild's backlist book club felt like the perfect way to do that. We meet on Sundays. We are international right now, so Sundays are the best way to do it. And we meet on Zoom and we all pick a book and we talk about it, and then we talk about everything else we read during the month, and then we pick another book for the next month. So it's been so much fun so far, and we'd love to have you join the book club. So if you'd like to support the Bookwild podcast, you can go to the Patreon link in the show notes and you can sign up for whichever tier interests you. And if you're looking for a free way to support the show, if you can like and review it on whichever platform you listen to, that helps so much. The other thing with Adrienne at the beginning is she is trying to become sober, but she's also dealt with like pill addiction, Xanax, stuff like that, which is also kind of like her way of coping with everything that happened to them as well. So how did you kind of handle writing that part with her? Because her kind of inciting incident too kind of like helps her want to stop even more.
I mean, addiction is a disease. It's a disease that hits every demographic, that hits every, you know, race and class. And I know and love many people who have struggled with substance abuse
Mhm.
issues. And I guess I just wanted it to be a story that also dealt with, like, it doesn't have to be, like, the most dramatic thing. It can just be
Mhm.
somebody who, like, has not been able to deal with parts of their lives that were really painful, and when
Yep.
everybody else was partying and being fun in their 20s, it was totally fine, and they kind of haven't been able to let go of that numbing,
Mm. Mhm.
and to just kind of treat that with compassion,
Mhm.
that I mean, my hope is that when she talks about, like, when she gets to the summit and she's really struggling and she just wants to drink so bad, that
Mhm.
you feel that it's not because she's, like, some, like, lazy idiot who can't get her, life together. It's like, this is
Mhm.
someone who's, like, emotionally in a lot of pain
Mhm.
and doesn't know how to weather that discomfort on her own.
Yeah.
And I guess I just wanted that to be part of the story because, you know, Chiara's addiction is her own kind of like, I'm gonna make it perfect. I'm gonna make it
Mm.
good. I'm gonna do it
Mhm.
right. Like, that's its own kind of, like, hyper
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
And so it felt normal to me that somebody else would be like, "I'm never doing that, and it's gonna look like this, and I'm having a great time, and you don't know." And it's like, well,
Mhm. Mhm.
you also haven't dealt with what happened to you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
have compassion for her.
Mhm. Yeah, and with Kiara, like you're saying, it's basically an obsession for her
Mhm.
to want everything to look controlled and to look perfect. And do you
Yeah.
feel like that's also what made her susceptible to,
Yeah.
like, getting into a group think or a hive mind, institution or whatever?
Yeah, they're both trying to deal with a big, big wound,
Mhm.
and I have deep compassion for both of them, you know?
Mhm.
Who
Yeah.
hasn't tried to, like, resolve an issue from their past by doing something that seems totally disconnected in their future? It's like, I know
Right.
I have.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
okay, and just to know what you're doing it and then to not have people exploit that, that's the part that
Mhm.
really
Right.
I'm gonna get it.
I know. I get it. Yeah, it's really shady and obviously manipulative. There's, like, a lot of
Mhm.
manipulation going on throughout
Yeah.
this whole story as well. I think,
Actually
like, the other thing is, like, in some ways, so I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it, but what I think women recognize that we're more powerful than we used to be told. I think women by and large know that. But I
Mhm.
think, like, also there's something about, like, if you're a mom, you become, like, unassuming in certain things. Like,
Yes.
there's this, like, moms wouldn't, like, sell me wrong or try to manipulate me. It's a mom, and you're like, "Yeah, but, like, they're people, so, like, some
Yes.
of them are gonna do it."
Yes, the kind of, hiding in plain sight,
Yeah.
banal thing that also not to be, like, super political, but it's like
Go for
white
it.
women are pros at that, right? Like, "But I'm a
Mhm.
mom." And you're
Mhm.
like, "You just said something super fucking racist in Target. It doesn't matter that you have a
Yes.
two-year-old in your cart. That's, like,
Yeah.
reprehensible behavior."
That makes it
Um,
worse.
yes, you're teaching
Yeah.
a child that this is how you behave.
Yeah.
And so this kind of mask of, like, "I'm just a mommy." It's like,
Mhm.
why are you giving up your own agency? And if you aren't giving it up, why are you, like, playing into this idea of basically
Right.
like, "I'm just a big baby, and now
Mhm.
I'm not accountable for my actions." It's just like, that's devious and very wrong.
Yes.
Like,
It
let's
is.
I'm not doing that with you. Um,
Mhm.
so I think there was a lot of that, and that's also part like, the social media world and the mommy influencer world, like,
Mhm.
so white. It's all white, and it's
Oh,
all
I'm
just
sure.
like, "Look at my perfect little picket fence life, and I'm not
Yeah.
actually gonna, like, comment on anything that's happening in the world because this is just about babies." And I'm like,
Right.
"Your babies live in the world." Like,
Yeah,
let me
they're
do.
going to. Like, they're gonna be on their own eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also reminds me social media at large, not even just, like, mom-fluencer side of it.
Mhm.
I've heard a couple of the podcasts I listen to every now and then, they talk about like 80% of the hateful comments they're getting, they like click on the person and it's a person who's like, boy mom, lover of Christ, and it's like a Bible verse underneath it, and she's like, what? This shouldn't make sense, but it's
Yes.
like by and large that's who's leaving these shitty comments.
And like in a weird way, not in the shitty racist comment way, but in the way
Yeah.
of like, I used to be a whole person and
Mhm.
now I've been reduced to mommy.
Yeah.
And I did feel so much anger. I
Mhm.
felt so angry. I was so
Mhm.
angry.
Mhm.
Because I actually started writing this book when I found out, like I had started writing it, like kind of outlining it, but didn't really know what was going on. And then I
Mhm.
found out I was pregnant again with my son. And it's
Oh.
like, we really wanted to have this baby. We were really
Mhm.
excited. And I also, like, Bernice has a speech about feeling like I am getting shoved out of my own life, like against my will. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to
Mhm.
stay me and have these children. Like, that was
Mhm.
how I felt. I wrote that in one sitting, just like so angry. And
Yeah.
so I don't think saying you love Christ and then leaving like racist comments on Instagram is the way to deal with that rage. But I'm also just like, don't be angry on Instagram. Like, fight for a universal basic income.
Right. Yeah.
That's where rage should go. Don't be a
Yes.
mean girl in high school. Like, fix your local school. Like, get the
Right.
library fixed. Like, create a park where there's a parking lot. Like, do something productive that helps everybody.
Right.
Um, but that anger, I mean, I think a lot of uh, like mothers have that, and it's so
Mhm.
like, but this is the best thing that's ever happened to you, and it really is
Uh-huh.
like, oh, am I wrong for feeling this
Mhm.
way? And when I started sending the book out, the people who read it first, who really got it, were like, I have that rage. And I was just
Mhm.
like, okay, welcome. I do too. We're not supposed to talk
Yeah.
about it, but we can here.
Right. Right. And it's very new that we're talking about just like the huge, I was talking to my sister-in-law about this, like the massive amount of sacrifices you are going to have to make, and the fact that there are going to be days where you're like, why did I do this? And that it's just like, it's not going to be just this beautiful thing where you're like, oh, I have a kid, it's my whole world, like this is my whole heart.
Yeah.
It's not just that. There's so much else that goes on, but even that conversation has only recently, like you're saying, become a little bit more normal to talk about. Is like, you still feel rage. It's not like you transform. It's kind of like the what is that the the mother or the Madonna, what is that
The Madonna or the whore.
yeah, so it's like almost like that, but it's
Yeah.
like, oh, you're a mom, so now like you don't have other needs. This just
Mhm.
fulfills everything for you. Like
Mhm.
you just become a whole other person, and it's like you probably do
Mhm.
become a whole other person in some ways, but to me, the thing that scares me the most about it is what you said, is feeling pushed out of my own life. Because
Yeah.
like no matter what, the women end up doing more work, even just down to the fact that you have to like give birth to the child.
I mean, and this is part of why I wrote a book and didn't
Mhm.
write a screenplay, was because I had spent years doing like development that would just like go nowhere, and like almost getting staffed on shows and like doing like free work
Mhm.
on pilots that didn't get picked up. And I was like, well, no one's going to hire me to work in a writer's room anymore because I have two kids.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like my career is dead.
Because you expected really long hours, right? Is
Yeah.
part of it. Mhm.
Yeah. And I was like, I really needed this book for
Yeah.
my child. And so I'm just going to write a book. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'll publish it as a PDF on Reddit
Right?
if I have to. I want to write this book. If I don't write this book, I'm going to have an exorcism because it's just like this
Right.
demon living under my skin. And
Mhm.
yeah, but it was like but part of it was because like I'm so sick of not being able to be in control of my life, and now it's gonna be even
Yes.
worse, and, like,
Yes.
I'm not gonna get tired anymore, and I just was
Yeah.
like, I'm like, why is, like, the accommodation of, I need to know when I'm gonna go home,
Mhm.
that would have been unheard of to ask for. I need to know what time I'm gonna be home.
Right.
I would have been fired, like, day 1. I wouldn't have been hired at all. So, I
Yeah.
just was like, I'm gonna do this because I have to.
What I love about that is it's like you created it's like this book was your way of still keeping yourself, like, parts of
Yes,
yourself. It's like
yes,
you were like, "Oh, this I don't want this to happen." And in
yes.
a conventional workplace, it's gonna happen. I'm not gonna get to, like, feel like that person still. No one's gonna see me that way. So I think it's really empowering that you were then like, "Okay, then I'm gonna write this book. Like, I'm still gonna do things for me and that, like, feel important to me."
Mhm. Yeah, and I just really needed that. I was
Mhm.
not willing to disappear,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I felt like in COVID and quarantine, I had to because, like, I needed to care for my child, and my husband was working, and, like, we had an edit bay in our bedroom,
Oh,
and,
wow.
like, it was really hard, and I really just did like, there was no space for me to exist that wasn't there wasn't somebody else already in that room. Like,
Mhm. It wasn't an empty room.
yes, and so
Yeah.
I just felt like, I'm gonna make an empty room on this page and say
Yeah.
all the things I'm not supposed to say about how angry I feel and how betrayed I feel by everyone who told me that I
Yeah.
could have it all. I'm like, "I can't fucking have it
Ugh,
all. There's no one to
right?
do the laundry." Like,
Exactly.
and so
Totally. It's I don't know if you know Lori Brand, but your
mm,
story is reminding me of her story because she wrote a book called Bodies to Die For, and it's about body wars, like just all of the different ways we have talked about women's bodies for decades now. But she felt the same way. She was so fired up about her message around that, that like I think she almost said something really similar when you were talking about how you were like, I will publish this on a PDF if I have to. Like, I need to get this story out there. That's how she felt about it. And it's interesting because hers, like, is a thriller that's like also kind of taking place around conventions, but it's like bodybuilding ones. And
ooh,
then, like, it develops into this really explosive social horror by the end of it. So I love that both of you guys like were really passionate about these specific things. And then kind of what you're saying, we can use horror so much to talk about
mhm,
society and the things that are the scary, and then,
yeah,
like, vamping up the horrorness of it, like, makes it feel, it really connects fictionally too, so
I'm so
I'm
glad.
just making book comps now.
I love it. I mean, I think there's a way that there's a lot of this happening, right? Like, a lot
Mhm.
of you look at, like, what is A24 except, like, prestige horror, right? But it's
Yeah,
really prodding at these parts of culture that we haven't talked about, and,
right.
um I think, horror and satire to me, I've gotten a lot of questions about, like, what did it feel like to, like, combine these crazy genres? I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize I was doing that." It just felt like the only way to say what I needed to say was to have it be really funny, really
Mhm.
dry, and then really gory.
Yes.
Um, but those felt like 2 versions of, like, how can I take this reality and heighten it so that I can
Mhm.
say all this bonkers stuff.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that, like, a beautiful literary fiction version of this book would have hit as hard. It wouldn't have served what I needed it to do, and that's not to
Not for
shade
me.
literary fiction.
It wouldn't have
Literary
for me.
fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It
yeah,
had to
and
do that.
I think it did too, because it's what you're saying, like, Um, kind of like for the people who aren't noticing how angry they are even maybe, it's like seeing it exacerbated is what sometimes make people, like, realize what's happening at, like, a lower, less fictional level.
Mhm.
So, I agree. I loved the build up. It was great.
Yeah, it's been funny because some of the criticism that the book's gotten, I don't read the reviews, but my lovely husband will send me the nice ones, and I'm like, "What are the bad ones saying?" And
Yeah.
it's a lot of, like, "This wasn't realistic." That's a big thing that people don't like about this book, and I'm like,
It is
"Yeah, you're
fiction.
right. It's not realistic." I'm sorry that
It's
you had the
entertaining.
expectation that it would be. If I
Yeah.
went into this book wanting to be realistic, I also would give it 1 star, like, or
Right.
0 stars. So, like, totally hear that. But for me, like, what is Instagram except just like, I mean, I joke that it's like it's the cult newsletter. It's everybody saying the best thing that's happened to them, and everything's cropped and everything's funny and
Mhm.
pithy and on brand. And I just
Mhm.
was like, that's not realistic either. And so to
You're
then to
right.
pull it into the real world, and that's Adrienne's
Mhm.
perspective, and have people be like, but it's not realistic. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the whole point, is that it's not
You're like,
realistic.
"So you got it."
You just didn't
You
like it.
you
Totally
caught
fine.
on.
I don't need everybody to like it, but I've
Yeah.
enjoyed that, like, "Why isn't it realistic?" And I'm like, "Well, neither is
Yeah.
Instagram, and maybe that's kind of something we should talk about."
Right?
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes people's version of media literacy is interesting,
Mhm.
to say the least.
Like, maybe that was they the marketing didn't
Mhm.
give them the message they needed. I don't know, but I'm
Who
like,
knows?
I didn't want it to be realistic.
Right,
I don't have
totally.
realism. It's on my phone that I can't put down, and I hate that.
Yeah, yeah, like, it's called fiction for a reason. Um, but yeah, I loved it.
I'm so glad.
Have Are you a big reader? I think you mentioned you read.
I try to read.
You
I
try.
do have 2 small kids, so it's
Right.
kind of difficult. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks as opposed to
Mm,
being able to, like, sit down quietly with a novel.
right.
Um, so the last physical book that I read is I finally got to finish Liz Moore's God of the Woods, which was
Mhm.
wonderful, and I loved
Yeah.
that. And I am currently listening. I just finished, oh my God, I'm not gonna remember his name. Richard Osman, the We Solve Murders. He does, like, the Thursday Murder Club. So I
Yes,
just
I can't remember what the new one's called.
yeah. So I just finished that, and I'm
Mhm.
actually listening to Slow Horses because I love the
Yeah,
show
I do
on
too.
Apple. I think it's incredible. And so I really wanted to kind of, delve into that book series. So I'm a couple chapters into that right now. And yeah, I don't have a lot of time to read,
I
which is
bet.
hard. So my audiobook time is like I get in bed at night,
Yeah,
and that's when my anxiety is like, let's go crazy. And I'm like, let's not. And
let's
we'll
go
listen to
somewhere
an
else.
audiobook
Yeah,
for like an hour as I kind of wind down. That keeps my
nice.
brain from being like, but what if? I'm like, no, that's not helpful right now. Don't
Right.
don't do that.
I
Um,
know, it's the worst. Yeah,
that's my
those are good picks. I love Slow Horses on Apple. I tried reading them. If you're listening, you probably know that it's told a little differently than most narration styles, and I couldn't get myself into the books, but I love
mm,
the show so much.
yeah. I'm still a little ways into it. I'm really enjoying it.
Mhm.
Anything else? Oh, and of course, I last year read the new ton of French that came out, The
Mhm.
Trespasser, and so I had to go back and, like, check in on some of the old Dublin Murder Squads that I hadn't read in several years
Yeah.
to kind of be like, "Oh, yeah, I wanna reacquaint myself with Frank Mackey, who I think is one of the greatest
Yes.
writers." And so and then when in doubt, like, if you give me an MC Beaton, I
Mm.
oh, something just fell, I'm sorry. But, like, all the Hamish Macbeth and
Yeah.
Agatha Raisin, like, that British cozy,
Yeah.
you know, any Agatha Christie short story, PD James short stories,
Mhm.
I've listened to every MC Beaton there is. Like, there's, like, 100, and I've listened to all of them because I love a British cozy. They make me so happy.
That's good, yeah. And I've seen some good ones coming out recently.
I'm excited.
Um, where can people follow you to stay up to date with everything?
I have Instagram, which is
Mhm.
ironic.
I know.
So it's Elizabeth Rose Quinn author. That's it, just
Mhm.
at Elizabeth Rose Quinn author. And I do have a website, which is
Mhm.
elizabethrosequinn.com, where, like, stuff is updated.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm so bad at that. My
Yeah.
poor publicist was like, "You have to make a website," and I was just like,
What?
"Why?" Um, I don't want to. So it's kind of that. I'm not very good at TikTok. I watch it, but I can't figure out how to, like, upload things. It's like I'm such an elder millennial where I'm like, this new
Yes.
social media is too fast.
Yeah.
But that's kind of it. And I'll
Yeah.
be at Thriller Fest in New York in June, and I'll be at BoucherCon in New Orleans in September, and we're having a book launch here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So if any of your listeners are in New Mexico, please come to Bookworks on April 2nd, and we're going to have a party.
Yeah, definitely. I hope we do have some there. I will put all those links in the show notes, though, and otherwise, thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun, and if you ever just have, like, a dead week when you wanna talk about, like, Tana French or how much we hate social media, you just call me and we can have another
I'm
chat.
down. Well, I'm gonna add you to the co-host roster.
Oh my god, I can't believe I made it on the co-host roster. I'm so excited.